Hi everybody, welcome back to Steve's Garage. In today's video I'll be swapping out the control arms on a 2nd gen Ford Escape. This should be the same for the Mercury Mariner and Mazda Tributes, though the sizes may be different. This model is a front-wheel drive V6, so just double check your sizes before you get started. I've had a couple other videos where, people get ready to go and the sizes are a little different. Double check your sizes, but the procedure should be the same. In this particular case I'm swapping the control arm because the ball joint is shot, and because they're press fit I don't want to mess with just swapping the ball joint. Also, the control arm bushings are not looking so great, so I find it easier to just swap the whole thing. If you have any questions about diagnosing a bad ball joint, please watch my other video on that, and I also talk about why I like to swap an entire control arm instead of pressing the bushings in and out. With the disclaimers out of the way, let's go over what you'll need. 13/16 socket, 19mm socket, 15mm socket, 13mm socket, 10mm socket, torque wrench, 1/2 inch ratchet, 1/4 inch ratchet. A pickle fork is not 100% necessary, but it really helps. Trim removal tool, again, not 100% necessary, but really helps. A hammer, breaker bar, and an impact gun, which isn't 100% necessary, but again, if you live in a place with snow and salt, you'll want to break those rusty bolts loose. With the car safely supported off the ground, you can remove your wheel, giving you access to the control arm and ball joint. There's a 13 and a 15 mil needed to remove that pinch bolt and nut. Sometimes with the impact gun, it'll just zip the bolt right out. Other times you gotta hold that nut. Just depends on what happens. Next, grab your 13/16 socket to remove the rear control arm bolt. You also need your pry bar to pry up in the control arm because the angle's gonna be all off and the bolt's not gonna come all the way out. Up next is disconnecting the front of the control arm, which is a 15 mil bolt. If you're not using an impact gun, you can skip over to removing the shroud and just use your ratchet and probably a shallow socket and it'll be fine. I am using an impact gun and didn't want to do it by hand, and removing the shroud is only a clip and a bolt, so I went that route. That's what I cover in this next step, but it's optional. Behind the strut is one of those standard clips where you pop out the center of it and then pop out the outer portion. That releases the rear part of the shroud. In front of the strut there are two 10 mil screws. You remove those and then you can bend the shroud out of the way, and there's room to get your impact gun to remove that front control arm bolt. Now you can use your pickle fork or whatever other implement you decide to separate the ball joint from the knuckle. Again, you don't need the pickle fork, it just makes it a lot easier. Speaking of which, the easiest way that I found to do this is to actually remove the control arm from the body mounts, and then you can use the pickle fork or the hammer or whatever and just bang on it until it comes out of the knuckle. Otherwise, it seemed like the angle was kind of off and you're also fighting the control arm being mounted up in the body. This way, gravity's working for you and all you've got to do is just hammer this thing down until it hits the ground. One quick note of caution, you don't want to pull on the strut knuckle axle assembly too much. It's pretty difficult to pull the axle out of the transmission, but it's pretty easy to pull the tripod out of the inner CV joint, so just don't mess around with this too much and be conscious of what you're doing with the axle. Here I'm just comparing the old and new parts. I always do that, it's a good habit to have. I am swapping the whole control arm because these ball joints are press fit. I've done it, I don't like to do it, and it's not worth it to me, especially if the control arm bushings are old and they're the next thing to go. Just swap your whole control arm. I'm using precision control arms from O'Reilly Auto Parts. It came with the bushings and ball joint installed, and most importantly a new pinch bolt. Some didn't come with it, and I knew the old hardware wasn't going to come out cleanly. Lastly, these also have a Zerk fitting. I've said in other videos, I don't think it matters if you go one way or the other. Just know if you get the ones with the Zerk fitting, those have to be maintained. I just grease them every time I change the oil. Now on to installation. The best way that I found is to secure the rear control arm bushing first, then the ball joint, then the front control arm bushing. If you have a better way, please comment and let me know. Starting with the rear of the control arm, get that bushing up into the body and grab your bolt and hand tighten that. There's no need to torque anything down yet. Moving on to the ball joint, you're going to have to bend the control arm down to get it around the knuckle. Take care to not damage your ball joint. And then the ball joint stud should slide right up into the knuckle. With no pinch bolt there should be no resistance. Don't use a hammer or anything like that. Once that's in place, grab your hardware for that, whether it's new or old, and hand tighten that so it doesn't fall out of the knuckle. The best way I found to get the front part of the control arm into the body was to actually use a jack and just jack the control arm into where it needs to go. As you can see, I did have to reposition the jack once it was mostly into the mount, but this is way easier than doing it by hand or trying to mess with a pry bar. Just like the other 2 points, once it's in place, get your bolt, hand thread it in there, and now we can go back and torque everything to spec. The rear control arm bolt is torqued to 110 foot-pounds. The front is torqued to 85 foot-pounds, and the pinch bolt on the ball joint is torqued to 46 foot-pounds. If you bought greasable ball joints, now's the time to do that. If not, throw your wheel back on, tighten everything down, let the car down, and take it for a test drive. I hope this video helped you out. If you have any questions or comments, please leave them below. I answer everybody I can. Thank you so much for watching, and don't forget to subscribe.